Meet the rabbi. Introduce you to the rabbi. Yeah. Let me introduce you to my wife. This is Lori. Hello. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Hello, how are you? David Green.
Connection here of some sort, right? Weren't you at one point in Allentown?
Yes.
I grew up in Allentown.
Oh, my wife is from Allentown. Yeah.
What, my maiden name is Traub. T-R-A-U-B. Susan.
T-R-A-U-B.
Yeah, Susan
Yeah, what?
and Simon.
I do remember them from, I was the cantor at KI for 5 years.
So my parents were very good friends with Rabbi Brockman.
Oh, yes,
I don't know if
yes.
you were there at the
Yeah,
time.
yes, we were. Yes, I've known her for many years, yeah.
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 My brother, and growing up in Harry, we haven't talked to them in years.
Yeah.
But my brother and Harry were very good friends.
Oh,
My
wow.
mom was very, very, very good friends with Pam.
Yeah, yeah, that's very sad, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she passed away shortly after I got there in Allentown, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was in high school at the time. But my brother, I went to William Allen. My mom went there. Yeah, we just had
Hello, nice to meet you, David Green. How do you do? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
and this is my son.
How do you
Evan.
do? Nice to meet you, Evan. We met. Hello again. Hello again.
So I'm trying to think. My brother, I was in high school when Pam passed away, when Robert passed away.
Yeah.
So my brother would have just been bar mitzvah during that.
You know her remarried.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ellen. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah. Nice to meet you.
I knew there
Oh.
was somebody I needed you to.
I have one other question.
Sure, of course.
Which synagogue were you at in Philly, outside Philly?
Beth Orr? Yeah, I just retired from there. Yeah.
So my mom's brother was there. I don't know, Kuller is the last name, K-U-L-L-E-R.
Oh, it doesn't ring a bell offhand. Yeah.
Lisa and Steffi were my age, and Henry and Eileen are my aunt and uncle.
They belong to Beth Orr?
I don't know
So,
where
okay. Yeah.
They were down in that area.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, where the synagogue was at was northwest suburbs near Ambler campus of Temple University? Yeah.
They grew up in Upper Dublin.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe they belong to the conservative synagogue, Temple Sinai? Oh, okay.
They were the Reform.
Cool, it doesn't ring.
I'll ask her.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll find out.
yeah. I put this on already and turned it on? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So that will then broadcast, but I won't be heard unless I speak.
Right, right.
Hi, Barbara. Katie, how you doing? Four generations? Hi, Noah. Hi, Shelley. Here, I got you off there. Tricky, that's a light bulb, it's tricky.
Mm-hmm. It's lovely. Oh, it's lovely. It is.
Hi, Marla. Saturday morning to do that.
Take good notes.
Well, I'll be thinking of your uncle, talking about the unrest in Israel. Or your cousin, Jolie. Hey, Michael. Welcome to everyone. It's 5:29. To those of you online who are with us, we will start in just a moment, and I'll do introductions. The camera is up there. It is fairly new, but we are using, just to explain why, we are using microphones and you're not hearing it. The microphones are purely for the streaming. They are not for the amplification here. Hopefully we don't need it for the amplification here. But until we get a built-in microphone, which is coming, we have to use microphones here or... Reform Judaism was founded in Germany, so it was in a certain time frame. And one of the great secrets to ending a service on time is starting a service on time. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rabbi Michael Feshbach. I'm delighted to welcome our visiting guest cantor this Shabbat, David Green. Perhaps you'll have a chance to schmooze a little after the service, but Cantor Green is retired from Congregation Beth Orr in Springhouse, Pennsylvania, where he was the Bema partner for years with Rabbi Greg Marks, who was my predecessor in my first job as an assistant rabbi in Beth El in Boca Raton. So we are meeting for the first time now, but we are greeting each other with a long list of people we know and share in common. So we welcome this Shabbat with a medley of Hine Matov. The words to Hine Matov are on page 128, and you will know 2-3 of these settings at least.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. לי 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 לי. הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. לי 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 לי. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, לי 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 לי. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב, שבת אחים גם יחד.
We jump for a moment to page 647. Words which often come from Havdalah, from the service that ends Shabbat, but we include tonight at the beginning, Adonai is my strength and my might, God will be my salvation. Azi v'zimrat Yah, vayhi li lishua.
עוזי וזמרת יה, ויהי לישועה. עוזי וזמרת יה, ויהי לישועה. Let's try that together again. עוזי וזמרת יה, ויהי לישועה. Ozi וזמרדיה ויהי בזמרה עוזי וזמרדיה ויהי לשועה עוזי וזמרדיה ויהי לשועה. From the beginning, עוזי וזמרדיה ויהי לשועה עוזי וזמרדיה ויהי לשועה.
Kabbalat Shabbat, the psalms and songs with which we welcome Shabbat. Tonight, page 130, but not 131, from Psalm 95 only, a familiar setting of Lechu Neranena.
Lecho neranena, lecho neranena, lecho neranena l'Adonai. Lecho neranena, lecho neranena, lecho neranena l'Adonai. Naria, naria, letzoi yeshenu bekama fana betoda. Naria, naria, letzoi yeshenu bismirot naria lo. Lecho neranena, lecho neranena, lecho neranena l'Adonai. Lecho neranena, lecho neranena, lecho neranena l'Adonai.
So I can sing, but not into the microphone, and also not throw you off, because you've got a, that's great, I love it. And if I don't throw him off, I'm not throwing you off. So. We continue from Psalm 99 on page 135. Romamu Adonai Eloheinu, exalt Adonai our God, and bow toward God's holy hill. The last paragraph on page 135, the last paragraph in Hebrew.
Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehakodsho. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehakodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehakodsho. Romimu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehakodsho.
Lechadodi, pages 138 and 139, a setting that you are familiar with, I believe, but I'm less so, but which Cantor Green knows, and which we will sing together stanzas 1, 2, and 9. We are jumping from stanza 2 to repeating Lechadodi, and then stanza 9. Pages 138 and 139.
Lechadodi lekrakala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lechadodi lekrakala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Shamu v'zachor b'dibo echad, hishmiyanu el hamyochad, Adonai echad u'shmo echad. L'shem glorifirat v'litila lechadodi lekrakala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Lechadodi lekrakala pnei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'necha, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם ניסוחה, סוף מעשה במחשב ותכלה. לחדודי לקרא כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לחדודי לקרא כלה פני שבת נקבלה בואי ושלום עטרה לה גם בשמחה וסהלה תוך אמוני עם סגולה בואי כלה לך דודי לקרא כלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקרא כלה פני שבת נקבלה.
Shalom Aleichem, page 142.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaSharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu nir leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seitchem leshalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
The bottom of page 143, the very bottom underneath the line together. And so we understand that ordinary people are messengers of the Most High. They go about their task, holy anonymity, often even unknown to themselves. Yet if they had not been there, if they had not said what they said or did what they did, it would not be the way it is now. We would not be the way we are now. Never forget that you, too, yourself may be a messenger, perhaps even one whose errand extends over several lifetimes. We continue with Chetzi Kaddish, we rise, we face east, and we continue immediately from 144 on to 146.
יקרא ויקרא שמי רבה, ילמד יברח חירותי וימלך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון, ובחייך בית ישראל, בגלה בגלה, ובזמן קריב וימרו. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם אלומי עמיה, יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויפר וינמה וינשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי לקודשם לילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דם יהירן ביעלמה וימרו ברכו בית אדוני המבורך Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
Page 149 on the bottom. This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai. each other but remaining standing.
Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael Amecha ahavta Amcha ahavta Torah u'mitzvot Chukim u'mishpatim Otanu lemadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shokbenu uvkumenu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'divrei toratecha u'mitzvotecha le'olam va'el ki hem chayenu v'yorech yameinu Ovahem nege yomam v'layla, nege yom v'layla. V'yahavat chal al tasir, mimenu le'olamim. Baruch ata Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kivod Malachuto Leolam Va'ed. Ve'ahavta v'et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol me'odecha v'hayu ha'devarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'aderech uv'shokbecha uv'kumecha Ukshartam leot ayadecha v'hayu letotafot beinenecha uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem ekol mitzvotai v'hiyetem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim Lihiot lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem.
Adonai Elohechem emet. Page 159 together, then back to 158 for Milchamot. Sing the song of men and women, joined in understanding and respect,
the song of God's miracles,
and earth protected and cherished, a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content, her soldiers home to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, the song of peace.
La 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 Mihi chamocha bawelim Adonai Mihi kamocha nedar bakodesh Nora tehilot o seifel Nora tehilot o seifel La 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 la.
ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וקולו מאוד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני קהל ישראל. השכיבנו, page 160.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השמות צאתנו הבואנו לחיים ושלום מעתה ועד עולם. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים.
Page 163, then back to 162 for Shamro. We are a people in whom the past endures, in whom the present is inconceivable without moments gone by. The Exodus lasted a moment enduring forever. What happened once upon a time happens all the time.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל עוד היא לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם.
We continue with the Amidah, the Tefillah. Beginning on page 164, we rise and we face east.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Hawel, Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei HaKol, V'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'Nehem, Lema'an Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham v'Ezrat Sarah, Ata Gibor le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh HaKol atah, Rav leHoshia, Mashiv HaRuach u'Morid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chayim b'Chesed, Mechayeh HaKol berachamim rabim, Tzomech noflim v'rofech olim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayeh emunato lishenei afar. Micha mocha ba'al gevurot, U'mido melech, melech memihit, U'mekayeh, U'matzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'emanata lehachayot hakol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh hakol, אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלע ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
172 or 173 and following, standing or seated in personal prayer. Page 178.
Shalom Rahav HaYisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rahav HaYisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki Ata Melech Adon Lechol HaShalom. Ki Ata Melech Adon Lechol HaShalom. Shalom Rahav HaYisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rahav HaYisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov be'enecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rahav HaYisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rahav HaYisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
You may be seated. We continue in personal prayer for another few moments. The bottom of page 180.
Ose shalom bimramav hoya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael vehimaru amen. Ose shalom bimramav hoya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'akol Yisrael vehimaru amen.
Don't go yet.
Okay.
Page 371. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzhak v'Yaakov v'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah O God, who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, send your blessing and your healing, your comfort and hope to all those who are ill and in need of healing, to all who are isolated and alone and in need of our attention. We mention at this time Mona Ellis, Jamie Raskin, Rabbi Sim Glazer, David Wetzel, Sonia Kaplan, Alan Rosenfield. Other names for the prayer for healing.
Harry Green.
Baruch atah Adonai Rofech Olim. We praise you, O God, who helps us heal, who brings us comfort.
Mi sheberach avotenu mekol habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mi sheberach imotenu mekol habracha liavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Several years before I worked for him as an intern at the Religious Action Center in Washington, the Reform Movement's social justice voice in the nation's capital. My mentor, my teacher, my colleague, Rabbi David Saperstein, came to the Cincinnati campus before I transferred to New York of the Hebrew Union College. And he said, quoting his father, Rabbi Harold Saperstein, when you couldn't think of a name that was appropriate for a sermon, you could always use "For Such a Time as This." Without doubt, that title applies now to what is going on in Israel. We have reached the end of the book of Exodus, Parashat Vayakhel and Pekudei, a combined portion, which we will be studying tomorrow at 9:15 and speaking about further at our Shabbat morning service at 10:30. Vayakhel is based on the root, a root you may know, Kehillah, Kahal. A Kehillah is a community. But there are different kinds of gatherings. It means to bring together. When the verb has a preposition, and prepositions are very important. Not propositions, prepositions. Prepositions are one of the hardest things to learn in another language. Vayakhel et. It means to gather together. But when it says, as it does in Parshat Korach, Vayikahalu al, it is meaning to gather against or to divide up, even though the root of kahal means community. And we seem now gathered against one another in Israel, at least right now. Pekudei, the second of the combined portions, is about the instruction for careful record keeping. I don't see our synagogue treasurer here today, but those who have been playing roles in carefully stewarding our resources know how important this is, but an accountability is much on my mind now as well. We might be forgiven. Some of you, I wouldn't likely have done this because I am usually on this side. You might be forgiven if you think that people are overreacting in Israel in thinking that the sky is falling. Any of us who are used to getting political emails, I think on either side of the political spectrum, are battered by hyperbole. I'm so tired of getting emails that say, awful, disaster, right? Like just to grab your attention as clickbait. Is the sky really falling? Are we really on the edge of an abyss? Is this the beginning of the end? Or is it perhaps the end of the beginning? One indication of how serious this crisis is, or two indications, can be taken from size and scope. These are the largest, most sustained, and most heartfelt protests, I think, in all of Israel's history. There have been brief demonstrations that have been almost as big as this after the Sabra and Shatila massacres, for peace on a number of occasions, the demonstration in favor of peace at which Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, but nothing like this. And by the way, notice that the so-called left, because it's not just the left, has done something that has been appropriated by the right for too long. They have reclaimed the flag, reclaimed patriotism on the side of protest. But it is not just size. This is not just the usual suspects on the left. Look at who is protesting. Look at who is writing in this country and in Israel and saying that this is the edge of an abyss. It's not just flaming liberals. Michael Bloomberg, Thomas Friedman, AIPAC. AIPAC is acknowledging the severity of AIPAC. By nobody's definition, a leftist organization. And by some people's definition, not even a centrist one. In Israel, my friend, my teacher, but somebody who is clearly on the center right, Yossi Klein Halevi, Daniel Gordis. I've been in a room where somebody raised a question about Israeli settlements and Daniel Gordis yelled and screamed at them that because their American children weren't serving in the IDF, they had no right to have an opinion, as if that had ever stopped a Jew before or ever stopped an American before. Daniel Gordis is encouraging American Jews to rise up and protest against the current Israeli. Daniel Gordis. And economists and those in the high-tech sector, elite reservists, they changed their minds about not showing up for duty, but they threatened it. That has, I think, never happened before. This is unprecedented. So what is going on? I am reminded, as much as I am a partisan on one side of this issue, of the Talmudic role of looking at things from all angles. Is there a way to look at both sides? What is going on? After all, I am familiar with the notion, I don't know if this is true, but I have been told that the symbol in Chinese for crisis is the same symbol as the one for opportunity. Is there a way to not let this crisis go to waste? For what I am about to share with you, I credit perhaps one of my favorite teachers. I share this with Rabbi Weiss. I believe that Micha Goodman, the philosopher, he's sort of a rock star philosopher in Israel. He wrote a book about Maimonides that became a best-selling book. Now that says something either about Maimonides or about Israel or about Micha Goodman. I'm not sure which. Micha Goodman was supposed to be studying with us this week about the book of Samuel, but instead gave over his entire time to his perspective on what is going on now. The Talmudic case of looking at the background and looking at all sides. 3 items of background. In some cases, this goes back all the way to the beginning of the state or the pre-state days. Some of them are incidents that are just like there are incidents in this country which were deeply, deeply important in the social history of our country but are under-taught. I think the New York City's teacher strike in the 1960s is one of those events. So too is this incident in Israel. Now, the camera is mostly facing me, so nobody, I don't think, is going to see your answer, so don't worry. But how many of you have ever heard of the Altalena incident? Good. Good. I got some of you. I'm not sure it's possible to understand the early history of Israel without... In the Yishuv, the days of the state before... the days before the state was founded, the Jewish community there was modeled on mostly people coming from Eastern Europe, and therefore they were oriented, like in Eastern Europe, to political parties which were more than political parties. I don't mean just the leftist parties. Even the right-leaning parties were like all-encompassing. They had a party preschool, not a preschool party. They had a party school, a party newspaper, a party cemetery, a party militia. And so you know some of the story of the competing militias in the pre-state days. Cherut, the party that eventually became Likud, the followers of Jabotinsky, was headed by Begin, who over time I've learned to have more respect for than I was raised to think about. He headed a militia called the Irgun. Ben-Gurion, in charge of the Labor Party, headed what became the IDF, the Haganah. And in fact, the IDF, you should know this because your son served in it, stands for Tzeva, force, Haganah, defense, Li-Yisrael. So the word Haganah, defense, is still in the name of the IDF. Ben-Gurion realized one of the first arts of sovereignty and statecraft was that a sovereign power has a monopoly on the use of force. That's really essential. There are many people, by the way, who argue that if Arafat had had an Altalena moment, he would have been alive today and prime minister of an independent Palestine living in peace side by side with Israel. I think it's an interesting argument. But what is the Altalena moment? The early days of the state, they were desperate for arms. And Ben-Gurion was in the process of turning all these separate militias into a single militia, single army. Irgun had commissioned a ship, the Altalena, and it had arms on it. And the Irgun forces brought it close to the shore, right outside of Tel Aviv. Ben-Gurion ordered the arms turned over to the central, what was becoming the IDF. Begin and the Irgun refused. In an incident which divides Israel to this very day, Ben-Gurion sunk the ship. There are those who consider Begin a traitor for not understanding that there needed to be one army. And there are those who consider Begin a hero for not firing back and starting a civil war. But the Altalena incident bred a resentment which continues to this day and plays a role in this discussion. That's background number one. Background number two. It's an Israeli characteristic. I'm not sure if anybody has ever described it the way I'm about to, but pragmatism without a philosophical foundation. A kind of just do it. The first assembly, which came to be called the first Knesset, David Ben-Gurion headed it up. It was supposed to be a constitutional assembly. They were supposed to meet to discuss the foundation for a constitution for the country. Two things happened. Number one, the Orthodox were saying we can't have a constitution. The Torah is our constitution, or some Orthodox forces then. And the other thing that happened was there were immediate and pressing needs. Did you know that Israel absorbed more immigrants than any other country in that time period in a very, very short, in the early days? And yes, the fact that they did so with condescension and bureaucracy, and they looked down on where the immigrants came from from the Arab countries, is causing social problems to this day. But they also did this also out of their heart, and they did this absorption. Nothing has ever happened like that before. It is amazing what happened. The pressing needs were indescribable. When you go around Mamila Mall today and you look at first world Israel, it's impossible to know how poor the country was and how in those early days. And so Ben-Gurion said, forget the concept, we need laws, let's start passing laws. And so they started doing something they were never elected to do. They just started functioning. They just did it, right? But without a constitution. Third piece of background, Remember the relationship of the branches of government in a parliamentary democracy. In a parliamentary democracy, its definition is you vote for the legislature, and the executive branch emerges out of the legislature. There are some modified models. In France, you vote separately for the president. France has a strong presidency, but it's still a parliamentary democracy. But it's not like this country where you have totally separate elections. Even in France, the president has to appoint a prime minister who can get a vote of confidence in the assembly. So by definition, in Israel, the government, meaning the executive branch, and the legislature, meaning the Knesset, are controlled by the same party or coalitions. And therefore, there's no separation, really. What the government wants to do, the parliament will pass. And that's important to remember. We'll come back to that. I'm sorry to go into so much detail, but this is really important, really complicated, and really up against the question of, is this the darkest challenge Israel has ever faced? Micha Goodman shared something. I will now present the position of those in favor of these reforms, this judicial reform. My own view, of course. Micha Goodman said that for the past 40 years, power has moved both from the government, by which we mean the executive branch, to the courts, and from the legislature, meaning the Knesset, to the courts. In the executive branch, there is a position in Israel which we could vaguely refer to as the Attorney General. The position is called Yoetz HaMishpati L'Rosh HaMemshala, the legal advisor to the Prime Minister. And it used to be that this person gave opinions, and the Prime Minister decided whether or not, when Julie was a lawyer for clients, she would give them advice. Sometimes they would follow it, sometimes they wouldn't. When she was the human resources manager for a water authority, she'd go, oh, yeah, now I know why sometimes we didn't listen to the lawyers, right? So it's advice, and the politician, the prime minister, would follow it or not. In the 1980s, that position was upgraded, and somehow it happened that the opinion or advice of this advisor about whether or not something was legal became the law. That it was illegal to not follow that advice. And so, to some extent, then the power shifts to the court from that. And then in the Knesset, in 1992, the Knesset passed, there are laws in Israel which passed by a supermajority of the Knesset, which are forming the basis of what will be a future constitution called the Basic Laws. And in 1992, a basic law on human rights and dignity was passed. In 1995, Aaron Barak, after 1 month on the job as Chief Justice, announces that the 1992 law has constitutional authority. It's a basic law. It's not he should have said that in some ways. But that becomes the basis for ruling invalid any law that was in contradiction to the 1992 Basic Law. In the past 10 years, a narrative has developed, which has gone like this, a narrative on the right. Look, it's no coincidence, they say, that this started in the 80s, continued in the 90s, because in 1977, that is when the right came to power in Israel for the first time. So a constitution by Barak, by the way, has been created not by the people, not by elected representatives, but by the Supreme Court, in effect. Just as in this country, it's not healthy to ignore or dismiss people who feel displaced, unseen, or unheard. I mean, one of the worst phrases of dismissal inside the vocabulary of this country, in my opinion, is the term flyover country. That's one of the great sins of those who like the coasts, is looking down on the middle of the country. It's not healthy to ignore, dismiss people who feel displaced and unseen and unheard. That is the position of those in favor of these reforms. We vote for the right, they say, but because of the power of the Supreme Court and the power of this advisor, we get left-wing policies. אתה מצביע ימין ומקבל שמאל. That's what that phrase means. Against the reforms. Remember that in Israel there is no local or state, there's no vertical sharing of power. There's no congressman who represents a particular area. It's all national. So there's no vertical sharing of power. There's no state check on a federal government. And also there's no vertical check because the executive and the government and the legislature have no boundary between them. The executive emerges out of the legislature. There's no check on that. What the government wants in the executive branch, the government will get through the legislature. So the only power which can block the executive or the legislature is the Supreme Court. The pro-reform force is about the past. The anti-reform folks who are demonstrating now, their anxiety is about the future. Because look, by the way, at who's in this government. One minister who just visited Washington calls himself a fascist homophobe. I'm not calling him that. He described himself that way. And he just said that an entire Palestinian village should be wiped off the map. That's a minister. There's another minister who believes that we can't carry it out, but believes that the biblical death penalty for gays and lesbians is appropriate. A minister in the government. Others have called Reform and conservative Jews worse than Hitler. These are ministers in the government. There are people who declares that those who would protest and the entire Arab sector should not be allowed to vote. These are not people who believe in democracy, and they are the government of Israel right now. If the left feels, by the way, just the other day, somebody scheduled a 14-year-old girl scheduled to sing at a municipal concert, was told she couldn't because there was one ultra-Orthodox man who objected. It's already the case that women have to change seats sometimes on El Al when an ultra-Orthodox passenger demands it. We are not making this fear up. This stuff is happening. It will happen more. And if there is no check, if there is no balance, if there is no limit, some of these worst-case scenarios are developing already. What is the worst-case scenario in Israel right now? That the government will get this reform unchanged. But then listen carefully to what's going to happen. Micha Goodman put this really well. This is longer than I usually speak for. It is. The next day, after these reforms are passed, cancel the power of the Supreme Court to cancel laws passed by the legislature. The Supreme Court will invalidate that law. So the Supreme Court will then attempt to cancel the Knesset's canceling the court's power to cancel the Knesset's laws. Did anybody follow that? Should I say it again? The Supreme Court will cancel the Knesset's act to cancel the Supreme Court's power to cancel the Knesset's laws. The crisis is clear. You've just taken a Palestinian prisoner and blown his brains out when he didn't have a weapon. There are ministers in this government who will give you a medal. There are judges in the courts who will put you in jail. Which one is going to happen? This is a real crisis. These are real things that happen. The police, the army. What will you follow? will enter a final character into this picture in a moment, and I'll finish up soon. Many Israelis agree, because there is no constitution, because Judge Barak may have overstated in giving too much power to the courts, that some reform needs to happen. What's the worst syllogism in the world? The worst syllogism in the world is, something needs to be done. This is something, let's do this. Into this picture enters a man who is supposed to be merely ceremonial, the president of the country. In Israel, there is a distinction between the head of government, the prime minister, and the head of state, the president. Usually the president's role is merely symbolic. But in this case, for the first time in Israel's history, a president has waded into serious, consequential matters of policy and put forward a possible compromise. Listen, to some extent, and Micha Goodman said this too, it should not be shocking that this is collapsing. What should be shocking is that it took this long without a real constitution. The question is it possible? In the bars, they're not talking about the Palestinian conflict right now. They're not even talking about, is Bibi the savior or the devil, which has dominated Israeli politics for a decade now. They're talking about not policies. They're talking about the structure of government. That hasn't happened since the founding days of the state. This could very easily be a constitutional breakdown. It could also be a constitutional moment. Micha Goodman laid out the worst-case scenario of the reforms passing and then the Supreme Court invalidating them. He says it might not happen, but he says something has to happen for that not to happen. This is a very real crisis. It will affect your Jewish identity. It will affect how the Israeli government views you as Jews, and whether it views you as Jews at all. It will affect what is the relationship between Israel and Jews all over the world. And it will affect Israel's ability to have a moral high ground that it has held since its founding. They've muddled, they've managed this whole time. Now is the time for change. I'll end with a bizarre image in Washington, D.C. When Smotrich, the minister I was referring to, fascist homophobe, recently spoke at an Israel Bonds dinner in Washington, and shame on them for hosting him. There were many protests outside. There were 3 groups protesting. What are the 3 groups? American Jews, expatriate Israelis holding up Israeli flags, and Palestinians, often holding up Palestinian flags. And a policeman looked at the groups and they said, I thought you guys hated each other. That's how powerful this reform is. Look who it brought together. Please read. Please go to haaretz.com. Please go to jerusalempost.com. Please read what you can. Please research what you can. Please do what you can to lend your voices in this pivotal crisis moment. Shabbat Shalom.
Yeshikoach. Yeshikoach.
That is way longer than I usually speak, but I thought it really important. Our president and the family.
Shalom, and to everyone that is watching online from at home. I especially want to welcome Cantor Green. It was such a pleasure to have you here tonight. And I must just say that for the past probably at least 40 years, we have not had a male cantor sing here that I'm aware of. Yeah, we have not. And so it's very different. It was beautiful. And we welcome you here this evening.
He'll be back on April 7th, but are you going with him on Sunday?
Aha, okay. And I just have to point out something that I think is just fabulous, and that is the row behind Cantor Green, because we have 4 generations of Beth Israel. We have great-grandfather Norman, we have his daughter, grandmother Shelley, we have her daughter, Erin, and her daughter, and I am blanking on your name, I am sorry. Noah, I do know it's Noah. 4 generations of Beth Israel family, and I just had to say something. I hope I didn't embarrass you. I'm sorry. It's just such a nice thing. I want to just tell you a few dates that are coming up in March. I'll tell you what they are, but they're March 24, 29, 30, and 31. And if you can't remember the things, it comes out every Friday on our announcements. Rabbi already mentioned tomorrow morning with Torah study and services. On the 24th, following Kabbalat Shabbat services at 5:30, there will be a J Place adult dinner, and Rabbi will speak on the secret message of the Seder. The cost is $15 per person, and you must make reservations, so please call the temple office. Again, that's March 24th. I think that's next Friday. It is. Okay. On March the 29th at 1 o'clock, our J Place adult book group will meet in the Cohen Library, and they will talk about the book Who by Fire by Leonard Cohen. About Leonard Cohen. Okay. On the 29th. On the 30th, we will celebrate a night of pizza or pasta before Passover. If you go to La Pizza Tega in Linwood Green and you tell them you are from Beth Israel, they will make a donation to Beth Israel. So you're supposed to gobble up all of your bread things before Passover. On March the 31st, there will be a Tot Shabbat pizza dinner followed by a chocolate Seder. The cost is $18 per family. And again, please RSVP for that to Miss Cookie. And I think that's enough announcements, because that's enough to remember. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Our service continues with Aleinu on the bottom of page 586. As we continue with Aleinu, please rise.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא,
Page 588.
שהוא נוטש שמיים ויוסר הארץ, ומשוב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו, ושכינתו גו, בגבהי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, הם מלכנו אפס זולתו, קרקעתו בתורתו, וידעת היום וישב אל עבדיך כי אדוני הוא אלוהים בשמיים ממעל והארץ מתחת אין עוד.
Page 591.
נאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
As is the recent custom of our congregation, as we call the name of a loved one, should you choose to do so, should you feel comfortable doing so, we ask that you rise at that time so that we may know that you are here in mourning and in memory. Then we will, as is the custom in most Reformed synagogues, rise as a congregation as a whole for Kaddish Yatom, for the mourner's Kaddish itself. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother, your sister, walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give to them what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live on in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children who need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. We remember at this time those of our congregation's beloved whose yahrzeit occurs on this Shabbat: Lou Brown, Erwin Cantor, Jacob Carson, Henry Kassman, Dr. Jules Chapin, Rebecca Charney, Jacob Fleischman, Rachel Glazer, Sally Goldberg, Eva Gutman, Henrietta Gutman, Nina Levine, Ann Levy, Emmanuel Littman, Jenny Manco, Nathan Miller, Helen Novak, Jacob Okian, Seymour Pliskin, Toby Pritz, Mayor Reich, Alexander Reinheimer, Morris Sabbath, Gerald Sash, Jenny Schiff, Molly Sherman, Alan Slaff, Morris Spitzer, Paul Stoller. During this period of Shloshim, the 30 days following her death, we mention the name Sheila Randall. Memories of all of our loved ones are with us. Our griefs and sympathies are mingled as we turn now to Kaddish Yatom, the Mourner's Kaddish, page 598. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, b'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayei uvyom echon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach leolam olmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudusha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata. Da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol Yoshvei Tevel v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn among us and wherever they may be, all those who are suffering the pain of loss everywhere, and together let us say, Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
Shabbat Shalom. Please join us for candles, kiddush, and motzi in the lobby. We conclude here with the singing of Adon Olam, and which setting is it?
French Sephardic.
A French Sephardic one. I think you've heard this before, but your suggestion and my happy endorsement.
Adon Olam asher malah b'terem kol Yetzir nivra li'et nasa v'chesta kol azai melech shemo nikra azai melech shemo nikra v'yacharei kiklot hakol levado yimlok nora v'hu haya v'hu hove v'hu yiyeh v'tifara v'ho yiyeh v'tifara b'yado av kidruchi b'yeit ishan v'yawira v'imruchi gaviati Adonai li v'lo ira Adonai li v'lo ira.
Thank you so much. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please join us. Shabbat Shalom to those watching from afar. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. And Yasha Koach, I enjoyed your talk very much. It was very informative. Very informative.
Still streaming, so let's,
Oh. Take my microphone off.
thank you. Very detailed. I thought